I can't figure any of it out. Hello. Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may happen to be. What the hell just happened there? There we go. Anyway, sorry, I'm trying to make that go. Go away. There we are. All right. Anyway, hi. Good to see you. It is Sunday, a couple of minutes after 7 o'clock here in California. Not sunny California today, wet, rainy California, which is fine for me, not so good for the dog, who hates and despises weather of all kinds. This dog is fortunately was not ever going to be a sleigh dog or a sled dog or a working labor dog of some kind, because he would not be able to go out in any kind of weather except sunny and mild. He doesn't like wind either. He's we don't know what it is with that dog, whether he was traumatized in puppyhood or whether his brain chemistry is just strange, but we figured it out early on, and so we don't push him. And when he's worried about things or upset, we just try our best to be kind to him and not force him to do things he doesn't want to do, which is just about anything. He always wants to go to the lowest point when he's upset about the weather or something. So this will, in the old days, he would try to break down the baby gate that was on the stairs to get down to my office, which is downstairs. The rest of the house is above me. But once he figured out that that didn't work, now he just paws at the door until we let him out, and then he goes and sits under a tree in the backyard, looking sad and pathetic. But he's happier that way than he is inside the house with the rain drumming down on the roof. I don't understand. I don't pretend to understand. I don't think even a dog psychologist would understand, because in their own way, animals, dogs, certainly, mammals, lots of cephalopods, they're all pretty darn complicated. They may not be quite as complicated as human beings, but they ain't that far off. I had a rap about this, I think, last week or something, when I was talking about ape language. But it's true. Anybody who lives with animals knows how complex and individual that they can be. And Johnny is a priceless example of that. I've never had a dog quite like Johnny, and I've had lots of dogs and been around lots more. So anyway, didn't mean to get off on that, except just that becomes the reality of the household. When it's rainy, Johnny is miserable, and we spend a lot of time kind of dealing with him. So that's been part of what's been going on today around here. Not a lot else to report. As I mentioned, we've already sent Into the Narrow Dark off. I am now working on Navigator's Children, which is made complicated because of the fact that it's been close to a year. I don't know, many, many, many months since I last did anything with it. And during that time, I was finishing up the previous volume, Into the Narrow Dark. And as a result, a lot of things changed, and now I have to leaven those back in, as well as finishing the things, finish the parts that I hadn't written yet. In part because I knew that things would change, and I didn't want to box myself in and spend a huge amount of time writing stuff that would not make it to the final version. So, enough of my problems. These are, there are a lot worse things to have to deal with in life. So yeah, except for the occasional, oh God, what was the name of the movie? I've just gone blank on it. The one with James Caan and as the writer, the Stephen King one. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It'll come back. But except for those kinds of moments, which I have never had one and hope never to have one, except for those kinds of moments, writing is not really that strenuous or dangerous a profession. So please don't think I'm complaining. I'm not. Anything else? Nah, we're still just in the run up to the holidays and doing all that stuff, and meanwhile kind of staying low key again because of the pandemic. So not a huge amount to report. Any interesting things to share? Nah, not really. Not really. Just life. Life is lifelike. That is my only conclusion. Life is usually extremely lifelike, and life has been lifelike. And I have not much else to say. So let me say hello to the people who are here, because that's always fun. And then we will get on with getting on. So first up is Mr. Unangst. Jerry, hey buddy, sup with you? Thaddeus, hello, good to see you. Claudia, hello, hello. Howdy to you. Medardo, hello to you, sir. A pleasure to have you as always. Un placer verte. Your pick. Emily, hello, Emily. How are you? Good to see you. And who else? Mahmoud, good to see you. Kelly, good evening, good evening. Nancy, eating snacks and listening to Tad. What could be better on a Sunday night? Sending snacks to Tad. Okay, just so you know. No, just kidding. I have plenty of snacks around. That's the one good thing about being an adult is like when you go to the grocery store, you can say, hey, I want some damn snacks, and you can buy snacks for yourself. Anyway, Ronnie, good to have you. I'm glad you made it. Michael James Prast, hello. Good to see you. And Sasha, audio check, video check, no freezes. That's all good. The neighbor's rooster is roosting all the time. Asks Mahmoud. I don't know. Should you feed it chocolate? I don't know, because if he was a dog, then chocolate would kill him. And if that's what you wanted, but you don't want to kill a dog, and you probably don't want to kill a rooster, maybe you should feed him peanut butter. Because when you feed peanut butter to dogs, they just go, and a rooster who's going, probably couldn't be going, or whatever noise it is that the roosters make where you live. Let's see, who else have we got here? Mike. Mike's birthday. Well, congratulations, Mike, and very happy birthday to you. I'm glad to hear it, and thank you for spending some of it with us. Carl, hello, good evening. Yes, I am staying warm. And Emily sends a happy birthday to Mike. And who else have we got here? Have I got Misery? Yes, thank you, Jerry. You are absolutely right. Jeremy, hello, Jeremy. Good to see you. And yes, Thaddeus also explains to me in my fading brain cells that Misery was the name of the film. Chris, hey dude, good to see you. How are things in NZ these days? Ray, hello, greetings. Good to see you all. Thank you for joining me. And as I said, I'm going to be reading, and I don't really have that much else to talk about tonight. I wish I did. Because I haven't been doing much of anything. I've been like watching YouTube videos and reading as usual, some stuff that I have to read here and there as research material. And that's about all. I haven't been playing any music. I haven't been drawing. I haven't been doing any of the other things that are fun to do. I've just been working and napping because, when all you do is work, sometimes you have to break it up with a little nap. And so I don't have much to explain right at the moment, but if I did, I would. So anyway, let's go back to the book. And the book, for those of you who are not 100% certain, although I think everybody here is kind of like making it a weekly thing. So anyway, Otherland, City of Golden Shadow. What we read last night was 2 sections. The first, which was a complete chapter, was Paul Jonas escaping from the trenches of his World War I experience in 1918 and experiencing a very strange kind of escape through an almost hallucinatory landscape. And finally, at the end, his so-called friends, Finch and Mullet, come for him to take him back because he's found a glowing portal that means escape. And they threaten him and frighten him and are just about to drag him back to the trenches when he finds the feather in his pocket and is reminded that there could be more than this. And he leaps through the portal. And that was the end of that section. Then we spent some time with Rini and Kabu when they were visiting Stephen in the hospital. And Kabu recited a Bushman poem for Rini about death. And now they are visiting Stephen's friend Eddie, whom he was with on the night that he fell into the coma. This is Stephen we're talking about. And Eddie and his mother Mutsi, and trying to get some information from from them about what might have happened to Stephen. So that's where we is. So Eddie has just come out from the back room where he was taking a bath, and he has been brought out by Mutsi to talk to Rini. Rini explained who Kabu was, but Eddie didn't seem too interested. Rini remembered how she had felt in these situations at the same age, that adults were to be considered part of a shapeless enemy mass until proven otherwise. I don't blame you for anything, Eddie. I'm just trying to find out what happened to Stephen. He still wouldn't look up. He's sick. I know that. But I want to find out what made him that way. We didn't do anything. I told you that. Not that night, maybe. But I know you and Stephen and Soki were messing around on the net, going places you shouldn't go. I know, Eddie. Remember? Yes, he shrugged. So tell me about it. Eddie twisted at the doll in his hands until Rini worried that he might pull it apart. The damn things were expensive, and she ought to know, having supplied Stephen with more Net Surfer detective figures than she wished to count. Masker was particularly prone to damage, since he had a fragile, arch-exotic plastic hairstyle at least half his own height. Everybody else did it, he said at last. We told you. Just tapping and napping. Everybody else did what? Got into inner district? Yeah? What about that place? Mr. J's. Does everybody go there too? Yeah? Well, not everybody. A lot of the older guys talk about it. Rini sat back, giving up on her attempt to force eye contact. And a lot of them are probably lying. What have you heard about the place that made you want to go there? What kind of place is this? Kabu asked. Not very nice. It's a virtual club on the net, like that place I took you is a virtual cafe. She turned back to Eddie. What do the older kids say about it? That you can see stuff there, get stuff. He looked over at his mother, and even though she seemed enthralled with the two sticky men smacking each other with long glowing poles, he fell silent. Rini leaned forward. What stuff? Damn it, Eddie, I need to find out. Guys say that you can feel things, even if you don't have the flack. Flack? A new netboy term. They changed so quickly. The stuff so you can touch what's on the net. Tactors? Sensory receptors? Yeah, the good stuff. Even if you don't have it, there's things in Mr. J's you can feel. And there's, I don't know, guys say all kinds of... He trailed off again. Tell me what they say. But Eddie was clearly uncomfortable talking to an adult about backroom netboy gossip. This time it was Rini who turned to Eddie's mother for help, but Mutsi had relieved herself of responsibility and was not going to take it back. Several other lines of questioning produced little new information. They had gone into the club in search of some of these whispered about experiences and to see things. Rini assumed it was pornography of some kind, either sex or violence, but had instead gotten lost and wandered for hours through Mr. J's. Parts of it had been very frightening and disorienting, others just interestingly weird, but Eddie claimed he could remember little of what they had actually seen. At last, some men, including an unpleasant fat man, or a sim that looked like one, sent them downstairs to a special room. Soki had fallen into some kind of trap, and the other two had somehow escaped and called Rini. And you can't remember any better than that, even if it might help Stephen get better again. For the first time all evening, the boy met and held Rini's gaze. I'm not dumping. Lying, she explained to Kabu. I didn't say you were, Eddie, but I'm hoping you can remember a little better. Please try. He shrugged, but now that she could see his eyes clearly, she saw something elusive in his gaze. Was she sure he was telling the truth? He seemed frightened, and They were long past the point when he should have feared punishment from Rini. "Well, if you remember anything else, call me. Please, it's very important." She got up from the couch. Eddie started to move toward the hallway, head down again. "One other thing," she said. "What about Soki?" Eddie turned to look at her, eyes wide. "He got sick. He's at his aunt's." "I know. Did he get sick because of what happened when you were on the net together? Tell me, Eddie." He shook his head. "I don't know. He didn't come back to school." Rini surrendered. "Go on." Eddie, like a cork held underwater and then finally released, almost sprang from the room. Rini turned to Mutsi, who lay on the carpet beside her daughters. "Do you have Soki's aunt's number?" Mutsi climbed to her feet, sighing heavily as though she had been asked to carry several hundredweight of stone up the Drakensberg mountains. "Maybe it's around here somewhere." Rini looked at Kabu to share her exasperation, but the little man was staring at the wall screen in reluctant fascination, watching one of the sticky men trying to catch, kill, and eat a live chicken. The sound of audience laughter captured and processed until it echoed like the roar of machinery, filled the small room. The last classes of the day were being released into the halls. Rini watched the kaleidoscopic movement of color across the office windows as she reflected on human beings and their need for contact. Back at the end of the previous century, people had been predicting that school would be uniformly taught over video links, or even the teachers might be replaced entirely by interactive teaching machines and hypertext info banks. Of course, people had been wrong about that sort of thing before. Rini remembered something one of her university instructors had told her. When they marketed frozen food 100 years ago, the professional predictors said people would never cook again. Instead, 30 years later, they were growing their own herbs and baking their own bread from scratch in well-to-do suburbs all over the first world. Similarly, it seemed unlikely that human beings would ever grow out of their need for personal contact. Live lectures and tutorials were not quite as large a part of the learning experience as they had once been, when books were the only form of stored information. But those who had claimed that such time and resource-wasteful human contact would vanish had obviously been wrong. One of Rini's pre-law friends from university had married a policeman. Before she and the friend lost touch, she had gone to dinner with them a few times, and she remembered the husband saying much the same thing about criminology. No matter how many gadgets were invented for discerning truth, analyzers of heartbeat, brainwaves, voice stress, or electrochemical changes to the skin, police always felt most secure when they could look a suspect in the eye and ask questions. So the need for real contact was universal, it seemed. However many changes had taken place in the human environment, most of them authored by humanity itself, the human brain was still much the same organ that everyone's ancestors had carried around the Olduvai Gorge 1,000,000 years ago. It imported information and tried to make sense of it. There was no discrimination between real and unreal, not at the most basic instinctual levels of fear and desire and self-preservation. Rini had begun pondering these things because of Stephen's friend Soki. She had reached his mother on the phone early that morning, but Patricia Moete, whom Rini had never known well, was adamant that Rini should not come to the house. Soki had been sick, she said, and was just starting to get better. It would upset him. After a long and somewhat heated discussion, Patricia had finally agreed to let her talk to Soki on the phone when he got back from some undefined appointment that afternoon. At first, Rini's chain of thought had been prompted by the unsatisfactory nature of phone contact compared to an actual meeting. But now, as she considered the larger issues, she began to realize that if she continued to search for the cause of Stephen's illness, especially if it stemmed from his use of the net, she was going to be spending a great deal of time trying to separate unreality from reality. Certainly it was impossible at this point to even think of sharing her thoughts with the authorities, medical or legal. VR had received alarmist press from time to time, especially in the early days. All new technologies did. And there were certainly cases of post-traumatic stress syndrome and users of extremely violent simulations, but none of the accepted case histories looked anything like Stephen's. Also, despite her own not quite definable certainty that something had happened to him online, there was no real proof in the correlation of net usage to incidents of coma. 1,000 other factors could and would be suggested as equally likely to establish that pattern. But the even more frightening thing was the idea of trying to establish truth on the net itself. A police detective with the full weight of law and training on her side would have trouble working through the masks and illusions that net users constructed for themselves, not to mention their UN-mandated privacy rights. And me, she thought, if I'm right, that's where it takes me. And me, she thought, if I'm right, and that's where it takes me, I'll be like Alice trying to solve a murder in Wonderland. A knock at her office door interrupted the gloomy thoughts. Kabu poked his head in. Rini, are you busy? Come on in. I was going to mail you. I really appreciate you spending so much time with me yesterday. I feel very bad about taking you away from your home and your studies. Kabu looked slightly embarrassed. I would like to be your friend. Friends help other friends. Also, I must confess to you, it is a strange and interesting situation. That may be, but you have your own life. Don't you usually spend your evenings studying in the library? He smiled. The school was closed. Of course. She made a face and pulled a cigarette from her coat. The bomb threat. It's a bad sign when they get so common that I don't even remember we had one until someone mentions it. And you know something? No one else did until you. Just another day in the big city. There was a knock. Another knock. One of Rini's colleagues, the woman who taught the entry-level programming classes, had come to borrow a book. She talked the whole time she was in the office, telling some drawn-out story about an amazing restaurant her boyfriend had taken her to. She left without ever looking at or addressing a remark to Kabu, as though he were a piece of furniture. Rini was chagrined by the woman's manners, but the small man appeared not to notice. Have you thought any more about what you learned last night? He asked when they had the office to themselves. I am still not quite sure what you think could have happened to your brother. How could something unreal have such an effect? Especially if his equipment was very basic. If something was harming him, what would prevent him from taking off the headset? He did take it off. Or at least he didn't have it on when I found him. And I don't have an answer for you. I wish I did. The difficulty, perhaps even the ridiculous impossibility of finding the answers to Stephen's illness on the net suddenly made her terribly weary. She ground out her cigarette and watched the last of the smoke twisting toward the ceiling. This could all be the hallucinations of a grieving relative. Sometimes people need reasons for things, even when there are no reasons. That's what makes people believe in conspiracies or religions, if there's any difference. The world is just too complicated, so they need simple explanations. Kabu looked at her with what felt to Rini like mild disapproval. But there are patterns to things. Both science and religion agree on that. So what is left but the honorable but difficult task of trying to decide which patterns are real and what they mean? She stared at him for a moment, surprised again by his perceptiveness. You're right, of course, she said. So I suppose I might as well keep looking at this particular pattern and see if it means anything. Do you want to sit in while I call Stephen's other friend? If it will not interfere. Shouldn't. I'll tell her you're a friend from the Poly. I hope I am a friend from the Poly. You are, but I'm hoping she'll think you're another instructor. You'd better take off that tie. You look like something out of an old movie. Kabu looked a little disappointed. He was proud of what he saw as the formal correctness of his dress. Rini hadn't found the heart to tell him that he was the only person under the age of 60 she had ever seen wearing a tie. But he complied, then pulled over a chair and sat beside her, his back very straight. Patricia Pt.8 opened the line. She regarded Kabu with open suspicion, but was mollified by Rini's explanation. "Don't ask Soki too many questions," she warned. "He's tired. He's been sick." She was dressed rather formally herself. Rini vaguely remembered that she worked in some kind of financial institution and guessed that she had just come back from work. "I don't want to do anything that will upset him," Rini said. "But my brother is in a coma, Patricia, and no one knows why. I just want to find out anything I can." The other woman's worried stiffness eased a little. "I know, Irene. I'm sorry. I'll call him." When Soki arrived, Rini was a little surprised to see how very well he looked. He hadn't lost any weight. He had always been a little on the husky side. And his smile was quick and strong. "Hello, Rini." "Hello, Soki. I'm sorry to hear you've been ill." He shrugged. His mother, just off screen, said something Rini couldn't hear. "I'm okay. How's Stephen?" Rini told him, and most of Soki's good humor evaporated. "I heard about it, but I thought maybe it was just for a little while, like that kid in our form who got a concussion. Is he going to die?" Rini recoiled a little at the bluntness of the question. A moment passed before she could answer. "I don't think so, but I'm very worried about him. We don't know what's wrong. That's why I wanted to ask you some questions. Can you tell me anything about the things that you and Stephen and Eddie were doing on the net?" Soki looked at her a little strangely, surprised by the question, then launched into a long description of various legitimate and quasi-legitimate net-boy meanderings, punctuated every now and then by sounds of disapproval from his temporarily invisible mother. "But what I really want to know about, Soki, is the last time, just before you got sick, when you three got into Inner District." He looked at her blankly. "Inner District? You know what that is." "Certain, but we never got in there. I told you we tried." "Are you saying you never went into the Inner District?" The look on his young face hardened into anger. "Did Eddie say we did? Then he's Duppy Major." Rini paused, taken aback. "Soki, I had to go in and get Eddie and Stephen out. They said you were with them. They were worried about you because they lost you on the net." Soki's voice rose. "They're dumping!" Rini was confused. Was he putting this on just because his mother was around? If so, he was doing a very convincing job. He seemed genuinely indignant. Or had Eddie and Stephen lied to her about Soki being with them? But why? His mother leaned into the screen. "You're getting him upset, Irene. Why are you calling my boy a liar?" She took a deep breath. "I'm not, Patricia. I'm just confused. If he wasn't with them, why would they lie about it? It didn't get them off the hook. Stephen still lost his net privileges." She shook her head. "I don't know what's going on, Soki. Are you sure you don't remember any of this? About getting into Inner District? About going to a place called Mr. J's? About falling through some kind of door? Blue lights?" "I've never been there." He was angry and scared, but he still didn't seem to be lying. A few drops of perspiration had appeared on his forehead. "Doors! Blue lights! I never—" "That's enough, Irene," said Patricia. "Enough!" Before Rini could reply, Soki suddenly tipped his head back and made a strange gargling noise. His limbs became rigid and his entire body began to tremble violently. His mother grabbed at his shirt, but failed to hold him as he slid off the chair and fell to the floor, thrashing. Staring at the screen, helplessly transfixed, Rini heard Kabu gasp beside her. "God damn you, Irene Sulaweo!" Patricia shouted. "He was getting better. You did this to him. Don't you ever call this house again!" She knelt beside her son and cradled his twitching head. A froth of spittle had already begun to form on his lips. "Disconnect!" she shouted, and the pad screen went dark. The last thing Rini saw were the white crescents of Soki's eyes. His pupils had rolled up beneath the lids. She tried to phone back immediately, despite Patricia's angry words, but the line at Soki's aunt's house was accepting no incoming calls. "That was a seizure." Her fingers trembled as she pulled the flame tab on a cigarette. "That was a grand mal seizure. But he's not epileptic. Damn it, Kabu, I've known that child for years. And I had to play chaperone on enough field trips for Stephen's schools. They always tell you if one of the kids has major health problems." She was furious, although she didn't know why. She was also frightened, but the reasons for that were clear enough. Something happened to him that day. The day I went to get them out of the inner district. Then later it happened to Stephen. But worse. God, I wish Patricia would answer my questions. Kabu's yellow-brown skin was a shade paler than usual. "We spoke before of the medicine trance," he said. "I felt I was witnessing such a thing. He had the look of someone meeting the gods." "That was no trance, damn it, and there weren't any gods involved. That was a full-blown seizure." Rini was ordinarily careful not to tread on the beliefs of others, but just now she had very little patience for her friend's sorcerous notions. Kabu, apparently not offended, watched her as she stood and began pacing, rattling with anger and upset. "Something has interfered with that child's brain. A physical effect in the real world from something that happened online." She went to the office door and pushed it shut. Soki's collapse had intensified her feelings of being shadowed by some nameless danger. A more cautious part of her protested that she was leaping ahead much too fast, making far more assumptions than could be scientifically safe, but she wasn't listening to that part of herself at the moment. She turned back to Kabu. "I'm going there. I have to." "Where? To the inner district?" "To that club. Mr. J's. Something happened to Soki there. I'm almost certain that Stephen tried to sneak back in while he was staying at Eddie's." "If there is something bad there, something dangerous," Kabu shook his head, "what would be the point? What would the people who own this virtual club have to gain? It may be a byproduct of one of their unpleasant little amusements. Eddie said they're supposed to have experiences for sale that transcend whatever equipment the users own. Maybe they've found some way to give the illusion of greater sensory receptiveness. They might be using compacted subliminals, ultrasonics, something illegal that has these terrible side effects." She sat down and began excavating the mess of papers on her desk in search of an ashtray. "Whatever it is, I'm going to find out. If I'm going to find out, I'll have to do it myself. It would take forever to get anyone to investigate. UNCOM is the world's worst bureaucracy." She found the ashtray, but her hands were shaking so hard that she almost dropped it. "But will you not be exposing yourself to danger? What if you are affected as your brother was?" The little man's usually smooth forehead was wrinkled in a deep frown of worry. "I'll be a lot more alert than Stephen was, and a lot better informed. Also, I'll just be looking for possible causes, enough to build a case to take to the authorities." She crushed out the cigarette. "And maybe, if I figure out what happened, we'll be able to find some way to reverse the damage." She curled her hands into fists. "I want my brother back." "You are determined to go?" She nodded, reaching for her pad. She was filled with a high and even slightly giddy sense of clarity. There were many things to do. She had to construct an alias, for one thing. If the people who owned the club had something to hide, she would be foolish to walk in under her own name and index. And she wanted to do some more research into the club itself and the company that owned it. Anything she could learn before going in might improve her chances of recognizing useful evidence once she was on the inside. "Then you should not go unaccompanied," Kabu said quietly. "Yeah, but I... Hold on. Are you talking about you? Coming with me? You need a companion. What if something were to happen to you? Who would take your story to the proper authorities? I'll leave notes, a letter. No, Kabu, you can't." Her engine was running now. She was ready to move, and this seemed a distraction. She didn't want to take the small man. Her entry would have to be illegal, for one thing. If she were caught, her crime would be seen as much worse if she had dragged a student along with her. "Exams begin in 2 days." Kabu almost seemed to have sensed her thoughts. "After that, I will no longer be your student." "It's illegal." "There would be a presumption that, newcomer to the big city that I am, stranger to modern ways, I did not understand I was doing wrong. If necessary, I would help to support that presumption." "But you must have your own responsibilities." Kabu smiled sadly. "Someday, Rini, I will tell you of my responsibilities. But at the moment, I certainly have a responsibility to a friend, and that is very important. Please, I ask you this as a favor. Wait until exams are finished. That will give you time to prepare in any case. I am sure there are more questions to be asked before you confront these people directly, more answers to be sought." Rini hesitated. He was right. At least a few days of preparation would have to be fitted in around her work schedule anyway. But would he be an asset or a liability? Kabu returned her gaze with nonchalance. For all his youth and small stature, there was something almost daunting about the bushman. His calm and confidence were very persuasive. "Okay," she said at last. Being patient took a tremendous effort of will. "If Stephen doesn't get any worse, I'll wait. But if you come with me, you do what I say while we're in there. Understand? You're very talented for a beginner, but you are a beginner." Kabu's smile widened. "Yes, teacher, I promise." "Then get out of my office and go study for those exams. I have work to do." He bowed slightly and went out, the door closing silently behind him. The displaced air stirred the remnants of her cigarette smoke. Rini watched them eddy across the light from the window, a swirl of meaningless, ever-changing patterns. That night, the dream came again. Kabu stood at the edge of a great precipice, examining a pocket watch. This time it had sprouted legs and was walking on his palm like a flat silver beetle. Something hovered in the air beyond the edge of the cliff, obscured by the mist but moving closer. It was a bird, she thought when she first saw the wings. No, it was an angel, a shimmering, smoke-blue presence with a human face. The face was Stephen's. As he drifted nearer, he called to her, but his voice was lost in the rush of the wind. She cried out, startling Kabu, who turned and took a step backward, then tumbled over the edge and vanished. Stephen looked down at where the little man had fallen and lifted his tearful gaze to Rini. His mouth moved again, but she could still could not hear him. A wind seemed to catch him, spreading his wings and making his whole being ripple. Before Rini could move, he was swept away into the mist. Chapter 8. Dread. This is another, I'll warn you in advance, if I remember correctly, this is another fairly unpleasant part, just in the sense that It has unpleasant people doing unpleasant things in it, as I recall. Actually, I'm not sure about that because, as I think I've said, it's been a long time since I actually read these first volumes. Chapter 8, Dread. Netfeed News. Police kill 22 cannibal cultists. Visual, body bags being laid out in front of building. Voiceover. Greek military police gunned down 22 members of the controversial anthropophagy cult, reputed to engage in ritual cannibalism, in a firefight that turned the center of Naxos into a war zone. One policeman was killed and 2 others injured in the fierce exchange. Visual, bearded man holding up bone, shouting at audience. Pending identification of the bodies, some badly burned, it is not known whether the group's leader, Demetrios Christostomos, shown here in footage recorded covertly by a government informant, was one of those killed in the assault on the Sakristos. He liked the way he was moving, a slow lope, like a leopard just before it sprang. He upped the volume, and the shuddering drums were everywhere. He felt good. The soundtrack running on his internal system made it all perfect. Camera, camera, he thought, tracking the woman with his eyes. She had a rump, that one. It made him smile just to see its purposeful movements. And to accent the smile, he called in a trumpet glissando, sharp and cold as a knife. The silvery tones made him think about his own blade, a flat-backed Zeissing tendon cutter. So he pulled it out for a close-up look as the trumpet wailed, a slow dissolve that brought him up, hard as a rock all over. The woman jounced down the steps to the underground parking lot, hurrying a little. That fine rump bobbed, drawing his eyes away from the knife. Pale woman, rich and Jim slender, hair the color of sand, all trussed up in those fancy white pants. She hadn't seen him yet, but she must know he was following. Some animal part of her that, gazelle-like, could smell the danger. She looked back when she hit the bottom of the stairs, and for a brief instant her eyes widened. She knew. As he stepped down into the shadowy stairwell, he accelerated the drums. They bounced around inside his head, battering his skull like boxing gloves against the heavy bag. But his stride did not increase. He was too much of an artist for that. Better to go slow, slow. He turned down the volume of the skittering drums to enjoy the inevitability of the unfolding climax. A sneaky counter rhythm crept into the mix, an off-balance wallop like a failing heart. She was nearing her car now, fumbling for the remote. He tuned his vision until the woman and her heat were the only thing that glimmered in the dark garage. He sped up, prodding the music along so that more horns came in and the beats overlapped, building toward a crescendo. His fingers descended lightly, but the shock of his touch still made her shriek and drop her bag. Its contents spilled across the cement floor. Sought for remote, expensive Singapore datapad, tubes of lip gloss like bullet cartridges. The tumbled bag retained a heat trace of her hand, already fading. Aggression fought with fear across her face. Anger that someone like him should touch her, should make her spill her oh-so-private life on the floor. But as he moved to close-up on her face, his own mouth twisting in a grin, fear won out. "What do you want?" The voice hitched, barely audible above the clamor rattling through the bones of his skull. "You can have my card. Here, take it." He smiled, lazy, and the crescendo flattened out and held. The knife flicked up, pausing for a moment against her cheek. "What does Dread want?" "Your stuff, sweetness, your sweet stuff." Later, when he had finished, he slid the music down to a sunset diminuendo, chirping sounds like crickets, a mournful violin. He stepped over the spreading wetness and picked up her bank card, grimacing. What fool would take something like that? Only an outback idiot would fix the mark of Cain to his own forehead. He lifted the blade and traced the word sang, S-A-N-G, across the card's hologram surface in lines of red, then dropped it beside her. Who needs VR when you got RL? He whispered. Real. The god looked down from his high throne in the heart of Abydos that was, across the bent backs of his 1,000 priests prostrated before him like so many turtles sunning on the Nile's bank, past the smokes of 100,000 censers and the glimmering light of 100,000 lamps. His gaze passed even into the shadows at the farthest reaches of his vast throne room, and on through the labyrinth of passages that separated throne room from city of the dead. But still he could not locate the one he sought. Impatient, the god tapped his flail on the gilded arm of his chair. High priest something or other. The god could not be bothered with the names of all his underlings. They came and went like grains of sand in a windstorm. Crawled to the dais on which the golden chair rested, and rubbed his face against the granite tiles. "Oh, beloved of shining Ra, father of Horus, lord of the two lands," the priest intoned, "who is master of all the people, who makes the wheat to grow, who died but lives. O great Lord Osiris, hear your humble servant." The god sighed. "Speak. O beautiful shining one, O Lord of green things, this humble one wishes to tell you of a certain unrest." Unrest. The god leaned forward, bringing his dead face so close to the prostrate priest that the old worthy almost wet himself. "In my kingdom?" The priest sputtered. "It is your two servants, Tefi and Muwat, who trouble your worshippers with their evil behavior. Surely it is not your wish that they should make drunken riot in the priest's sanctuaries and terrify the poor dancers in such a distressing way. And it is told that they perform even darker acts in their private chambers." The old priest cringed. "I speak to you only of what others already say, O king of the uttermost west, beloved and undying Osiris." The god sat back, his mask concealing amusement. He wondered how long it had taken this nonentity to work up the courage to broach the subject. He briefly contemplated feeding him to the crocodiles, but could not remember if this high priest was a citizen or merely a puppet. Either way, it seemed too much trouble. "I shall consider this," he said, and raised the crook and the flail. "Osiris loves his servants, the greatest and the smallest." "Blessed is he, our Lord of life and death," the priest gabbled, crawling backward. He made excellent time, considering the indignity of his posture. If he was a citizen, he had mastered his simulation skills well. The god decided it was good he had not fed this one to the crocodiles. He might prove useful some day. As for the god's wicked servants, well, that was their job description, was it not? Of course, it was preferable that the pair be wicked somewhere other than in his favorite and most intricately constructed sanctuary. Let them make their holidays in old Chicago or Xanadu. Then again, perhaps more than mere banishment was in order. A little discipline might not go amiss where the fat one and the thin one were concerned. He looked up from these thoughts at the brazen cry of a trumpet and the tattoo of a shallow drum from the rear of the throne room. Yellow-green eyes glowed in the shadows there. "At last," he said, and crossed his emblems on his chest once more. The thing that stepped out of the darkness, and before which the priests parted like a great river swirling around an island, appeared to be almost 8 feet tall. Its handsome brown body was muscular, long-limbed, and vital, but from the neck up it was a beast. The jackal head swiveled, watching the priests scurry aside. The lips curled back, showing long white teeth. "I have been waiting for you, messenger of death," said the god. "Waiting too long." Anubis dropped to one knee, a cursory gesture, then rose. I had things to do. The god took a calming breath. He needed this creature and its particular talents. It was important to remember that. Things? Yeah, just a few matters. The long red tongue emerged and swept over the muzzle. In the candlelight, traces of what looked like flecks of blood showed dark against the long fangs. The god grimaced in distaste. Your heedless pursuits. You risk yourself needlessly. That is not pleasing. I do what I do, like always. The wide shoulders shrugged. The bright eyes closed in a lazy blink. But you have summoned me, and I have come. What do you want, grandfather? Do not call me that. It is impertinent as well as inaccurate. The old god took another deep breath. It was hard not to react to the messenger, whose every movement reeked with the insolence of destruction. I have discovered something of great importance. I seem to have an adversary. The teeth flashed again, briefly. You wish me to kill him? The god's delighted laughter was entirely genuine. Young fool! If I knew who he was and could set you upon him, then he would not be worthy to be called my adversary. He or she, he chuckled. The jackal head tipped to one side like that of a scolded dog. Then what do you want of me? Nothing, yet. But soon there will be dark alleys aplenty for you to haunt, and many bones for you to crack in those great jaws. You seem happy, grandfather. The god twitched, but let it pass. Yes, I am happy. It has been so long since I have been tested, since any but the most feeble have opposed me. The mere fact that one has risen against me and has trifled in even the smallest of my plans is a delight. My greatest test of all is coming, and if there were no opposition, there would be no art. But you have an idea who it is. But you have no idea who it is. Perhaps it's someone inside the Brotherhood. I have thought of it. It is possible. Not likely, but possible. The green-gold eyes flared. I could find out for you. The thought of unleashing this rough beast in that particular chicken coop was diverting, but unworkable. I think not. You are not my only servant, and I have subtler means of gathering information. The jackal's tone became petulant. So you called me away from other things, merely to tell me that you have no tasks for me. The god swelled until his mummy wrappings creaked and snapped, growing until his death mask face loomed far above the throne room floor. The 1,000 priests groaned like sleepers beset with the same bad dream. The jackal took a step backward. I call and you come. The voice boomed and echoed beneath the painted ceiling. Do not think that you are indispensable, messenger. Howling and clutching at his head, the jackal god fell to his knees. The moaning of the priests intensified. After what he deemed a suitable interlude, Osiris lifted his hand and the cry of pain died away. Anubis collapsed, stomach first, to the floor, panting. Long moments passed before he dragged himself up onto his hands and knees. His trembling head bowed until the pointed ears brushed the steps before the throne. The god resumed his normal size and surveyed Anubis's bent back with satisfaction. But, as it happens, I do have a task for you, and it does, in fact, concern one of my colleagues, but it is work of a less delicate nature than unmasking a secret adversary. My words of command are being sent to you even now. I am grateful, O Lord. His voice was hoarse and hard to understand. The candles flared in the heart of Abydos that was. The messenger of death received another commission. Dread yanked the fiber link from its slot and rolled off the bed onto the floor. Eyes clamped shut with pain, he crawled to the bathroom and groped for the rim of the tub, then vomited up the vat-grown kebab that had been his lunch. His stomach went on convulsing long after he had emptied himself. When it stopped, he slumped against the wall, gasping. The old man had never been able to do that before. A painful buzzing here, a nasty splash of vertigo there, but never anything like that. It felt like a knitting needle had been pushed in one of his ears and pulled out the other. He spat bile into a towel, then dragged himself erect and stumbled to the sink to wash the digestive fluids from his lips and chin. It had been a long time since anyone had made him hurt like that. It was something to think about. Part of him, the squinting child who had first confronted the authorities after hitting another 6-year-old in the face with a hammer, wanted to find out the old bastard's true name, track him to his real-life hideaway, then razor him and pull his skin off string by string. But another part, the adult creature who had grown from that child, had learned subtlety. Both parts, however, admired the exercise of naked power. When he was on top someday, he would act no differently. Weak dogs became bones for other stronger dogs. Helpless rage was a hindrance, he reminded himself. Whoever the old man really was, going after him would be like trying to storm hell to throw rocks at the devil. He was a big wheel in the Brotherhood, maybe the biggest for all Dread knew. He probably lived surrounded by overarmed bodyguards in one of those hardened underground silos so popular with the filthy rich, or on some fortified island like a villain in a Malaysian slash and smash Netflix. Tasting his own acids, Dread spat again. He must be patient. For the moment, anger was useless, except as a carefully controlled fuel. It was far easier and smarter just to keep doing what the old man wanted. For the moment. There would be a day later on when the jackal would rise to its master's throat. Patience. Patience. He lifted his head into the frame of the mirror and stared at his reflection. He needed to see himself clean again, hard, untouched. No one had made him feel this way for a long time, and the ones who had were all dead now. Only the first few had died quickly. Patience. No mistakes. He steadied his breathing and straightened up, stretching the kinks from aching stomach muscles. He leaned forward, zooming into close-up, the hero looking back with dark, flat eyes, swallowing his pain. Unstoppable. Music up, coming back strong. He stared at the puke-stained tub for a moment, then turned on the water, washing the vomit away in a swirl of brown. Edit that. Edit the whole tub scene. Missed the point. Unstoppable. At least this new job would be RL. He was tired of the costume silliness of these rich fools, living out fantasies that would shame the lowest charge head just because they could afford to. This task would have real risks, and it would end in real blood. That was worthy of him, at least, and of his special skills. The target, though. He frowned. Despite what he'd said to the old man, he wasn't crazy about being in the middle of one of these Brotherhood feuds. Too unpredictable, like some net thing he'd seen back in school. Kings and queens, scheming, poisoning. Still, such things had a hidden benefit. Let them all kill each other. It would just hasten the day when he could make things happen. He rinsed his mouth again, then walked back to his bed. He needed his music. No wonder he felt off balance. The soundtrack put everything into perspective, kept the story moving. He hesitated, remembering the agony the implants had so recently brought him, but only for a moment. He was Dread, and his chosen name was also his chosen game. His. No old man was going to frighten him. He summoned up the music. It came without pain, a firm syncopation, quiet conga drums and dragging bass. He laid a series of sustained organ chords over them, ominous but cool. Thinking music, planning music, you'll never catch me music. Even now, the downtown parking garage must be full of police detectives, dusting, scanning, taking infrareds, wondering why the crime didn't show up on their closed-circuit camera drones, all standing around examining the rags of white and red. Poor pussy. And she hadn't wanted anyone touching her stuff. Another one dead, they'd be saying, all over the net soon. He'd have to remember to watch some of the coverage. Dredd leaned back against the bare white wall as the music pulsed through him. Time to do some work. He summoned up the information the old bastard had sent him, then called up some visuals, maps first, then Leos scans and 3D blues of the target location. They floated in the air before him like heavenly visions against the background of the other white wall. All his walls were white. Who needed pictures when you could make your own? And that's where we're stopping. And with that, it's actually after 8 o'clock. So, well, it worked out pretty well. And so with that, I am going to cash it in for this week. As always, I thank you for joining me. I hope you're enjoying the story. Many of you have probably already read it before, but if you haven't, I hope it's a pleasure. I hope you're enjoying it. And what else did I want to say? Just the usual. Just take care of yourselves. Take care of the people around you. We'll all take care of each other. And eventually, we too will find better days. At least days when we can go out of the house without worrying about it quite so much. So, until then, listen to the Talking Heads Life During Wartime. Just remember, it'll all be different next time, but that doesn't mean it'll be bad. We'll work on making it better. Take care, and I will see you next Sunday at first it's this, not this slot, but the 1 a.m. slot, and then at this slot, 7 p.m. Sunday. And until then, actually, I just thought of something. Next Sunday is actually somebody's birthday. I think, however, we'll probably wind up not doing the birthday thing that evening. So anyway, watch my social media pages in the next week, and I will certainly let people know as soon as possible if for some reason I'm not doing one of the readings, or if I have to change the time or something like that. So that just suddenly occurred to me. Until then, until whatever happens, I will see you all soon, and good night.